Hi,
Hello.
Esther.
Hey,
How are
how are
you?
you doing? I'm good, thank
Good.
you. It's nice to have you here to meet you online.
Yes, nice to meet you as well.
So just to say to people who are watching, I'm going to be asking questions. But if you have any and you want to put them down, then also Amir can reply to this. So don't hesitate to put your questions down below. Um, Okay, so you've just, I think your concert just got published on the page. My first question would be, how did it feel to kind of play again for a kind of concert? Obviously, we haven't done concerts in a while, but how's it felt?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think for me, there's two parts. Two major categories that make music so wonderful. One is sort of the personal gratification that we get as musicians. From spending time with music and really exploring all the wonderful nuances and interpreting the music. I think it's an incredibly gratifying experience. But on the other hand, there's the an entire aspect of sharing music with people, and that can come in so many different forms. It can come in the form of collaborating, in terms of chamber music or playing with an orchestra, but also, performing for friends, or the traditional concert hall performances, or outside of concert hall, in schools and in other venues. I think that's one of the most incredible experiences, because music sort of spans and all these different boundaries, and it is truly a universal language. And I think that's one of the big things that has been most difficult for me, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing with coronavirus, is that it has really sort of made it difficult to share music. And I think that these virtual initiatives are really essential in this time, and it's a really wonderful way to sort of pick up music making and sharing again.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I guess we have to adapt, right? Can't
Yeah,
stop making music, just have to adapt it.
yeah.
And so my next question is going to be about basically your practice routine. How is it usually, and has it been affected by the coronavirus? Are you practicing more? Are you practicing less? Do you keep, can you keep motivation?
No, yeah, that's a great question. I think that with coronavirus, it has made everything a lot more flexible in terms of practice. In general, I have more time that I can practice, but the one sort of silver lining is that I can sort of switch. If I'm not feeling particularly productive, I can go take a walk really easily, or switch and do some physics, or anything like that. Because at least for me, I find that changing sort of modes of thinking, and having sort of that flexibility within my practice routine has really helped me come up with better sort of musical ideas and be more productive at the piano. So
Has
that, yeah.
anything? It's got a positive effect on your.
Sorry, what was that?
It has had a positive effect on your practice, if anything.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's always yeah. I think that in general, I've had more time, and also I've had more flexibility. So it has been a positive effect practice-wise. Yeah.
Well, good to know.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Sophia who's asking, who is your favorite composer?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. Um, Honestly, I think it changes all the time, depending on what I am. I wouldn't say I have a favorite. Depending on who I'm spending most time with. I think recently, this is the 200th anniversary of Beethoven's birth, right? And of course, that means everyone's playing Beethoven. I'm playing a lot of Beethoven, but also I had the wonderful opportunity to take a class with Professor Federico Cortesi at Harvard on Beethoven, specifically this past semester, and it was just such an incredible experience because we sort of used the Diabelli variations as a case study into how Beethoven thinks compositionally, which is a sort of perspective on Beethoven. You usually get the historical perspective, the musicological perspective, theoretical, but Fed really challenged us to put ourselves in Beethoven's shoes and try to think about composition from his perspective, which was really eye-opening and really helped me appreciate his genius and sort of his how creative and imaginative Beethoven was as a composer. So if I had to pick at the moment, I would say Beethoven.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. And I think, so actually, we'll probably follow on what you've said. We've got a question from Ken Schulman, who's asking, can you describe what goes on in your mind while you perform?
While I perform, that's interesting. I think it depends on the piece and the performance, but usually, by the time the performance comes around, all of the sort of heavy lifting of finding the interpretation and making the technical aspects of the piece match that interpretation, and really doing all of that sculpting of the piece is of course done beforehand, and then during the performance I always find it to be quite a liberating experience because it's really just sort of communication between yourself and the audience, and if I'm prepared well for the performance, it's just a really wonderful organic experience because of the preparation.
Yeah, it's where it kind of takes place and finally makes sense. And
yes, yeah, it really finds its home, and I think that's another important thing, that music really finds its home, amongst when it's being communicated. And I think that, that speaks to, and we can talk about this later on, but I think that music and art in general is incredibly important for social causes and sort of as an interface and as a means of sparking social dialogue.
Definitely, yeah. Well, I think we've got a new question, which actually I think came from what you said about you studying physics. And so somebody's asking, how does your physics and academics inform your music and vice versa?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question, because on the surface it may seem a bit counterintuitive or weird that there's sort of an interface between music and science, but first and foremost, I think that music and science, in my experience, have been driven by sort of the same and sort of foster the same values of curiosity and of humility. And the curiosity part is, the shared experience of exploration in music and in science. I think primarily, a lot of the wonderful insights, as a performer, that you reach as a performer and that you reach as a scientist, come from sort of coming in, reading the material, whether it's repertoire or literature, without these preconceived notions that can often hinder our sort of interpretations or the way that we think about things, coming in without a prejudice and letting the music or letting the evidence, the science, speak to you, and whether that comes in the form of studying the score very carefully or trying to understand the data that you're looking at very carefully. Having an open mind, I think, is the key for both, and being open to what comes to you. And then the other, I think that goes hand in hand with humility, because music and science have both such an incredible sort of sense of scale to them, and it really puts things in perspective. And we often feel, I was just taking a quick look the other day at the late Beethoven sonatas and just starting to read piano sonatas and starting to read through them a bit. and it's just, there's such a sense of awe when you encounter something really sort of brilliant or touching, and or something that connects to you in a visceral and emotional way. And I think the same thing, even though science, people often take away a lot of the emotion from science, but I think there's the exact same thing in science. When you sort of stumble upon something that challenges the way you think about the world. In my experience, that has been primarily in astronomy, and there's so much sort of rich knowledge to be discovered, and often the way I think that music is presented and that science is presented is that, oh well, we know, we have a very good understanding of almost everything, and then we're just trying to sort of inch forward at the edges and try to make some progress here and there. And I think that comes in like standard musical interpretations, that it's like, oh well, we've actually figured everything out, but you can make sort of small adjustments, and you can see that in competition culture and everything. And there's very much the same thing in science, sort of preserving the status quo and everything. But in reality, I think it's more like my advisor, Avi Loeb, who's chair of the astronomy department at Harvard, once said, and I'm paraphrasing, that the sum of our total knowledge is like a small island in a vast ocean of ignorance, and I think that applies in music as well, and really goes to show that these sort of having a childlike curiosity is really helpful in both disciplines.
That's extremely interesting to know, actually, to have the point of view of somebody who is actually doing physics. And actually, so somebody did ask how did you choose physics in Harvard? And as we all know, you have amazing talents in music. Do you want to become a concert pianist or a scientist?
Yeah, both great questions. So I've always had an interest in science from a young age. I mean, that sort of developed along with my interest in music, and I think that sort of looking back on it, it is as a result of many of the shared principles that I was just discussing. But in particular, physics in high school, really wonderful teacher. Her name was Miss Kissel, and she really showed me that, I loved all scientific disciplines, but I developed a special love for physics after she sort of showed the class, and myself in particular, how physics can explain, and the world is so messy. Nature is so messy. I think everything in the world, we cannot dictate how nature should or does behave, but it has a wealth of secrets and a wealth of beauty in it. And the wonderful thing about physics is, while you may not be able to understand, all of nature, or to, to get at some theory that describes everything in nature, physics, working from very fundamental, simple principles like conservation of mass, conservation of energy, these very sort of basic things, you can build up really, really good understandings and approximations of how nature behaves. And that reminded me of, in music, a lot of the most sort of visceral experiences I've had with music, whether it's listening as an audience member or playing, is when you develop a sort of connection with the music that feels very true. Yeah. And something that speaks to you personally and sort of describes some aspect of nature in a way. And so that really drew me in, and the idea that you could work from these very simple principles and start to build an understanding of things in nature that were not understood before. And then particularly I got interested in astronomy and astrophysics simply because it is really a golden age for these fields, and there is so much unknown. Yeah. Simply if you look at the solar system, can you believe the first interstellar object was detected in 2017? Literally 3 years ago was the first object that came from another solar system, and we detected it in our own. And the first image of a black hole was just years ago. and we still don't understand dark matter and dark energy. So there's this wonderful, I think, very, it connects very much to the arts. I think it interplays really well with the arts because there's this vast sense of exploration and wonder. And in terms of my future, I really hope to do both because I feel that science and music have a lot to say about each other, and I think that it's a really special combination, and I enjoy the way the way I take sort of lessons from science and think about what they mean for music and vice versa. So I hope to do both in the future.
Great. I mean, do you are you able to divide? I mean, that's actually just a question for me, but are you able to divide your time, because you must be working so many hours a day between both? There's such difficult field, and I mean, yeah, how do you manage it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that it sort of comes organically. I always I sort of try to ask myself what feels most productive at the moment, and what what my gut tells me in terms of dividing time, and going with that sort of sense of like if I have a particular itch to practice this piece and really work at it. I find that if I follow those sort of instincts, that the time I do spend practicing, or the time I do spend doing science or whatnot, or work, is much more productive than if I necessarily had a sort of predetermined every minute of the day schedule. Of course, you have to put some sort of general constraints. So, I do, mainly work during the day and music in both the morning and the evening. But, I try to keep it as flexible as I can because so I can sort of follow my sort of intuition on that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, we've got a few more questions. We've got one. Let me do okay, the first one that we had was asking, because obviously you major in physics, but are you also studying music at university or not?
Yes, yeah. So I'm right now I'm at Harvard. I'm working towards my bachelor's and master's in astronomy and astrophysics. Yeah. And at the same time, I'm also working towards my master's from the New England Conservatory of Music in piano. And yeah, I've been very fortunate to be a part of the Harvard NEC program, which is a really wonderful partnership, and as a result allows me to sort of pursue both both science and music in a very sort of rigorous way that makes me feel fulfilled.
That's wonderful. We've got another question from Sophia, who's asking if you play any other instruments besides piano. But I'm going to say, I mean, if you do, then I'd be like so impressed, because you're already doing so much.
Yeah, well, so in fourth grade, I think when we all had to pick an instrument, I played trumpet for a year, but it was a disaster. But in middle school and high school, I started to get into singing here and there, singing choirs and a cappella groups, because I found that, especially you're a violinist, and I think that has a much deeper sort of connection to sort of the vocal quality to it. Piano, I think, is a little bit more detached because of just the nature of the instrument, how it's percussive. Understand breathing better, and sort of lines and phrasing, and so that was a really wonderful experience, along with being able to do more collaborations with other people, because I was always in choirs or a cappella, and so that really was a wonderful experience. And so in college I joined the Crocodillos, which is Harvard's oldest a cappella group, and so that was a really fun experience, because I got to travel the world with a group of my friends. different, people from all walks of life did fundraisers, and it was really it really showed and confirmed the power of music for me. And then after singing with the Crocodillos, I decided to pick up conducting, and so I've been conducting the Hasty Pudding theatricals at Harvard throughout our run in. We do 40 shows. I conduct almost 40 shows throughout Cambridge and New York and Bermuda, and we're actually the United States' oldest theatrical group, and it's a really some of my best friends in the world are in the Hasty Pudding theatricals. Just a really wonderful, tight-knit community. Everyone, no one takes himself too seriously, and we're all there to sort of make this show together, which is written and composed from scratch each year, by the way, by students. It's just a really fun way to do music with other people and sort of have that aspect to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess as a pianist, often on your own, so it must be nice to group with the music, because otherwise it's often that pianist.
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry I cut you off, and I remember by memory, I think just a few questions. But I know you were talking about so how you also do music with with the choir. You also do conducting, which I think is great, because obviously, as I said, as a pianist, you're often more by yourself. You're not playing in orchestra so much. So I think that's really great. I think one of the questions was about again about managing time. Somebody I think asked about how do you even find time for a girlfriend. I don't know if that was a real question, but so I think maybe people would find it interesting. Could you describe kind of usual days? How?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the time of year, but usually I like to after I wake up and get ready, I like to do a little bit of academic work, whatever form that is, maybe research, and then transition pretty quickly to piano, because I love working in the morning. I love the light in the morning, and my mind works sort of well in the mid morning from a musical standpoint. And then so I play for a couple of hours, and then I usually eat lunch. And then after lunch, either I'll feel like working on a particular piece, or I'll have a particular idea that I want to work on, in terms of astronomy and physics. And so I usually choose one of those paths. In the afternoon, I might have some meetings relating to sort of some of the musical. Again, it depends on what time of year, if I'm doing other work, etc. But often I have calls that I take about projects that I'm working on. So currently, something that's actually launching soon that I've been working on for more than a year is the Music for the Parks project. And so this is a project in partnership with the National Parks Foundation, and we are we got these really wonderful composers, Benjamin Wenzelberg, Benjamin Nuzzo, and Sasha Jakob, and they wrote these incredible pieces about what the national parks mean to them and to the arts community and to the world, and so have been sort of coordinating the logistics on that. And so I usually take some of those calls in the afternoon, and then I usually go on a walk, and then eat, and then back to the same routine after dinner.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you for sharing that. I think probably we'll have to stop soon, because I think we took it was 30 minutes of question time. But maybe I can take the last questions that kind of went through. There was somebody asking about finger strength. Like, how do you train to get the strength in your fingers?
I think it's just something that sort of build up over time. I mean, I started at the age of 4, so my first teacher was kind of worried that she I wanted to start lessons at the age of 3 because I was always hopping up on the bench, and she was worried that she didn't want well, two things. One, she didn't want to turn me away from the piano, and also she wanted to make sure that I had the necessary basic finger strength to get started. But I think in terms of building it up, I think that's something that just comes with time and doing the basic exercises, scales, and not sort of, and making sure that you're building up in practice time and not sort of doing too much too early.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, especially so young.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the last question that we have, actually, somebody asked, who are your favorite composers? So we already done that, and Amir replied Beethoven at the moment. And then he asked, who did inspire you the most in your music?
Who's inspired me the most? Right. So in terms of current musicians that really inspire me from both an artistic standpoint, just a pure sort of musical standpoint, and also in terms of how they use that music, how they use that music for people other than themselves, and sort of spread the incredible wealth of music making, is, I would say, 3 people. So Long Long, Daniel Barenboim, and Yo-Yo Ma. And I think these 3 musicians, I mean, there are many others who do similar work, but I think these 3 musicians have really served as incredible inspirations for me of what, examples of how you can take art, put it into the world, and make it have an impact. And obviously Long Long has done an incredible job, for instance, with music education.
The foundation, that you admire so much.
Right, and he not only he's also an incredible mentor, but also he cares so deeply that everyone sort of should have the right to a music education and to arts education. And I think that's incredibly important for offering, making sure everyone has the same sort of opportunities, from that sort of creative standpoint. And then Barenboim has done incredible political work in terms of crossing divides, like with the work with Israel and Palestine, and his orchestra, and also he really cares a lot about underprivileged youth all over the world as well, and works with UN and just like Long Long and Yo-Yo Ma. And then Yo-Yo Ma, I mean, it goes without saying that he has really been a pioneer in terms of crossing musical boundaries. And I think that's really inspiring, because that's the joy of music. It's not just a personal thing. It's so wonderful because we enjoy it, and then we share that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you so much for answering all the questions, for sharing all your knowledge with us. It's really, really inspiring to see. I'm saying this from a musician's point of view, to see somebody who's not only into music, but you have so many other interests. And even within music, not only piano, but you're interested in so many other things. That's really beautiful and inspiring to see. So
thank you so much, Esther. Really a pleasure chatting with you today.
Pleasure. Well, thank you to everybody who tuned in. Sorry about the connection problem. I don't know what happened. But anyway, thank you again, Amir, and speak soon.
Thanks so much. Take care.